So, to get a license to drive a black cab in London, you have to pass this test. It's known simply as the knowledge.
Oh, right. I've heard of this. It's famously brutal, isn't it?
Yeah, it's insane. It requires memorizing this impossibly complex labyrinth of 25,000 streets and thousands of landmarks.
Wow.
And it's so notoriously difficult that the brains of the people who actually succeed literally change shape. Scans have shown that their posterior hippocampus, the spatial memory center of the brain, physically expands.
Which is just wild to think about. It completely proves that you aren't stuck with the brain you were born with.
Exactly. So why do we all constantly act like we are? I mean, you look at the absolute pinnacle of human achievement, and we tell ourselves this comforting lie like, I was only given the genetic blueprints for a garden shed, and they were given the blueprints for a skyscraper.
It is a very comforting lie.
Yeah.
You look at the finished product, the virtuoso, the CEO, the elite athlete, and we just assume their path was somehow smoothed by innate, untouchable gifts.
Right, because if they were born that way, it's basically a free pass for us.
Exactly. It excuses us from having to do the brutal, unglamorous work required to actually close that gap.
Well, today we're tearing up that excuse. The mission of this deep dive is to decode the actual architecture of human greatness. We're synthesizing a stack of 5 seminal books on expertise, resilience, and mastery to figure out how the extraordinary is actually built.
And it's an incredible lineup of sources.
It really is. We're pulling from Mastery by Robert Greene, The Obstacle is the Way by Ryan Holiday, Peak by Anders Ericsson and Robert Poole, Grit by Angela Duckworth, and Can't Hurt Me by David Goggins.
It's a pretty demanding roadmap we have ahead of us.
Yeah, for sure.
First, we're going to completely dismantle that talent myth you just mentioned. Then, we will explore the actual biological and psychological mechanics of true practice.
Right.
And after that, we'll map out the long road of apprenticeship and finally, look at how to weaponize adversity and shatter your own mental limits.
So let's start with dismantling that talent myth. If we look at Anders Ericsson's research in the book Peak, the science just absolutely destroys the idea of fixed innate talent.
It really does.
I mean, the London taxi driver study is just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to neuroplasticity.
Yeah, because for decades, the scientific consensus was that the adult human brain was essentially a static container. You got what you got.
Right, like a hard drive you couldn't upgrade.
Exactly. But modern neuroscience proves the brain is highly dynamic. However, and this is key, we have to understand why it changes.
Okay, so why does it?
Well, the human brain is fundamentally an energy-saving organ. It constantly seeks homeostasis. It wants to automate tasks so it can conserve calories.
That makes sense.
So it will not change its physical structure unless it is absolutely forced to by specific overwhelming demands.
Which means if you know how to place the right demands on it, the limits of human ability are incredibly elastic. There's this mind-blowing story in Peak about a college student named Steve Falloon. Normally, the average person can hold, maybe 7 or 8 random digits in their short-term memory?
Yeah, usually around 7.
But through structured effort, Falloon pushed his digit span to 82 random digits.
82. That's just staggering.
The crazy part is, he didn't have a freakish photographic memory. He just figured out the mechanics of hacking his own brain.
Exactly. The mechanism is what really matters here. Falloon was a cross-country runner. So when Ericsson gave him a string of meaningless numbers, like, say, 3492, Falloon didn't just stare at them and try to rote memorize them.
So what did he do?
He actively encoded them by attaching them to an existing mental framework.
Yeah.
He turned 3492 into a running time, like 3 minutes and 49.2 seconds for a mile.
Oh, wow. So he grouped the random data into meaningful, recognizable chunks.
Right. And through hundreds of hours of doing this, he built a custom cognitive architecture that allowed him to shatter a perceived human limit.
And realizing that changes how we view historical prodigies, right? Because the cultural narrative is that a young Mozart just walked up to a harpsichord and magic poured out of his fingertips.
Which is completely false.
Yeah. Ericsson points out that Mozart's father was this intensely ambitious music teacher who started systematically drilling him before he was 4 years old.
Right. By the time Mozart was performing his childhood miracles, he had accumulated unprecedented thousands of hours of intensive, structured practice.
Okay, let's unpack this math. Because if Ericsson is right and innate talent isn't the main driver of greatness, Angela Duckworth's research in Grit completely changes the game for the average person.
Oh, absolutely. Duckworth actually created a mathematical framework for this.
Yeah, she proposes 2 equations. First, Talent multiplied by effort equals skill. Second, skill multiplied by effort equals achievement.
Which means effort counts twice.
Yes. Talent just dictates how fast you acquire a skill when you apply effort.
But if you don't apply effort to that acquired skill, you never actually achieve anything.
It perfectly proves why the naturally gifted person who just coasts is so routinely outpaced by the less gifted peer who simply refuses to stop.
Exactly.
But I gotta push back on the nature of this grinding and the famous 10,000-hour rule.
Sure.
Because look, if I go out and play recreational tennis on autopilot every weekend for 20 years, I'll hit thousands of hours. But I am absolutely not going to become Serena Williams. Experience doesn't automatically equal expertise.
What's fascinating here is the vital distinction Ericsson makes between naive practice and deliberate practice.
Okay, what's the difference?
Naive practice is exactly what you just described. It's playing tennis on autopilot. Because your brain seeks homeostasis, once you reach an acceptable, comfortable baseline, say, you can hit the ball over the net without completely embarrassing yourself, your brain automates those motor patterns.
So you stop improving.
Right. Comfortable repetition from that point on produces zero physiological or neurological change. You actually plateau, and over time, your skills can even decay.
So to force the brain out of homeostasis, you have to use deliberate practice.
Exactly. And deliberate practice is highly structured. It requires a specific micro goal, intense focus, immediate feedback, and you have to be operating constantly on the ragged edge of failure.
You literally have to step completely outside your comfort zone so your brain is forced to adapt.
And what you are doing in those moments of intense friction is building what Ericsson calls mental representations.
Like the way a grandmaster sees a chessboard.
Precisely. Think of a chess grandmaster. They don't have a better memory than you do. But through years of deliberate practice, they've built these deep mental representations.
So they don't just see 32 separate wooden pieces on a board.
No, they see familiar, meaningful patterns, lines of force, and strategic chunks of information. Deliberate practice is the painful work of building those representations so you can perceive your field at a much higher resolution than anyone else.
But there is a fatal flaw in deliberate practice, isn't there? It is incredibly painful.
Very painful.
If you are constantly operating on the edge of failure and exhaustion, you will inevitably burn out and quit unless you are anchored to something much deeper. Which brings us to how we actually structure this effort over a lifetime. How do you keep going?
Well, you need an anchor. And this is exactly where Robert Greene's concept of the life's task from mastery becomes essential.
Right.
You simply cannot sustain deliberate practice if you don't deeply, obsessively care about the subject. Greene argues that we all have primal inclinations.
You can often see them in what fascinated you as a child.
Exactly. Long before society, your parents or the education system told you what you should care about. Discovering or rediscovering that life's task is the mandatory first step.
And Duckworth mirrors this in Grit with her concept of a goal hierarchy.
Oh, yeah. That's a great connection.
She found that gritty, highly successful people have one top-level ultimate concern. They're incredibly loyal to that apex goal.
But crucially, they're totally flexible about abandoning lower-level daily goals if they aren't serving the top of the pyramid.
Right. It's not about being stubbornly busy. It's about focused passion. She even has a practical tool to build this muscle called the hard thing rule.
The mechanics of the hard thing rule are brilliant, particularly for families. Everyone in the household has to pick one difficult thing that requires daily, deliberate practice.
So like playing the cello or a martial art.
Yeah, exactly. You get to choose what it is so it aligns with your internal interests. But the catch is, you are not allowed to quit in the middle of a season, or just because you hit a plateau and had a frustrating day.
You have to finish the commitment.
Right. It artificially trains the psychological muscle of follow-through.
I love that. So let's say you found that life's task. Greene says you then enter the apprenticeship phase. And I struggle with this phase because, honestly, it feels like career suicide.
How so?
Well, modern society tells us to constantly brand ourselves, negotiate higher titles, and fake it till we make it. But Greene says apprenticeship is about being a sponge, not a megaphone. He says you actually have to revert to a feeling of inferiority to absorb how things actually work. Taking a step back to be an inferior sponge feels incredibly risky today.
It definitely feels risky, but it is the only way to accumulate tacit knowledge. People fail at this stage because they prioritize the wrong metrics.
Like chasing a high salary or a prestigious title?
Or immediate social media attention, yeah. Instead of prioritizing the raw accumulation of skill, Greene uses the story of Michael Faraday to illustrate the alternative, which is just brilliant.
Remind me, Faraday was the bookbinder, right?
Yes, a completely uneducated working-class bookbinder. But he desperately wanted to understand science. So he attended lectures by the great chemist Humphrey Davy, took meticulous notes, bound them into a beautiful book, and gifted it to Davy.
Just to get his foot in the door as a lowly bottle washer?
Exactly. He suppressed his ego entirely.
Apprenticeship is like being a sponge, not a megaphone. You have to revert to a feeling of inferiority to absorb how things actually work.
Completely. By shutting his mouth, watching Davy's methods, and absorbing his high standards through proximity, Faraday eventually surpassed him to become one of history's most influential scientists.
Wow.
If you optimize for status too early, you sabotage the deep observational learning required for true mastery. Passion and brilliance are cultivated slowly through the friction of practice. They're almost never discovered in a sudden lightning bolt of inspiration.
Okay, so let's say you're anchored to your life's task. You've suppressed your ego, your head's down in your humble apprenticeship, optimizing for skill. You're doing everything right.
Sounds good so far.
But then reality hits, the market crashes, you get fired, your literal laboratory burns down. How do you handle that massive external friction without losing your mind?
This is where we transition from building skills to building resilience, using Ryan Holiday's The Obstacle is the Way. Holiday translates an ancient Stoic framework based on 3 disciplines: perception, action, and will. The core operating system comes straight from the Roman Emperor Marcus Aurelius. The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because I can hear you, the listener, thinking, isn't this just a recipe for toxic positivity? Are we supposed to just smile and be happy when our life's work literally burns to the ground or we get laid off?
That's a vital pushback. But we have to clear up what Stoicism actually is. It is not about pretending bad things are secretly good, and it's definitely not toxic positivity.
So what is it?
It is about objective perception. Holiday leans heavily on the concept of the dichotomy of control. Let me explain it simply. You have to draw a hard, unforgiving line in the sand.
Okay, I'm with you.
On one side are things you completely control: your effort, your emotions, your response. On the other side is literally everything else: the fire, the economy, your boss's opinion, the traffic. You have to train yourself to mentally delete that second category from your emotional bandwidth.
So when the fire happens, the fire is just an objective fact on the other side of the line. But the thought, this is a disaster, my life is completely over, is emotional editorializing that you are choosing to add to the fact.
Exactly. Holiday gives the example of a 16-year-old John D. Rockefeller. It's the panic of 1857. The economy is in absolute chaos, fortunes are being wiped out, and investors are literally jumping out of windows.
But Rockefeller doesn't panic.
No. He views the crisis objectively, as a school. He watches with complete equanimity to understand how market mechanics actually work, while everyone else is blinded by panic. He used the obstacle as his education.
Thomas Edison's story is the ultimate stress test of this. His massive multi-building laboratory caught fire, destroying years of irreplaceable prototypes and research.
A total nightmare scenario.
And instead of collapsing into despair, Edison reportedly watched the flames, told his son to go get his mother because she'd never see a chemical fire like this again, and the very next morning, he started rebuilding.
It's incredible.
He embraced the Stoic concept of amor fati, the love of fate.
And amor fati goes one step beyond just accepting the fire. It's actively embracing it. Edison chose to see the destruction as a clarifying opportunity to start fresh, unburdened by past mistakes. That is the discipline of perception.
And once the fog of emotion is cleared, you move to action.
Right. You don't batter yourself against a brick wall. If the direct route is blocked, you find the oblique angle. The obstacle simply tells you where to apply your effort next.
And when action reaches its absolute limit, when you face something you truly cannot change or outmaneuver, like a terminal illness or a profound personal loss, that is where the third discipline, will, takes over.
Yes.
Will is the inner citadel. It's the quiet endurance that allows you to survive what you cannot alter without losing your humanity.
Holiday's framework is perfect for external obstacles, but it leaves a major question unanswered, which is what happens when the obstacle isn't the economy or a fire or a terrible boss? What happens when the voice screaming at you to quit is your own? What happens when you are your own wall?
Oh, man. That is where we bring in David Goggins.
Yes, we do.
In Can't Hurt Me, Goggins provides a masterclass in confronting internal friction. And to understand Goggins, you have to understand his brutal starting point.
It was incredibly dark.
He grew up enduring severe physical abuse, rampant racism, and grinding poverty. He struggled with an undiagnosed learning disability. By his early 20s, his life consisted of spraying for cockroaches at night. He weighed nearly 300 pounds, and he was utterly defeated by his own mind.
But from that absolute rock bottom, he engineered an unbelievable turnaround. I mean, he loses 106 pounds in 3 months just to meet the weight requirements for Navy SEAL training.
Which is medically wild.
And then he survives Hell Week, which is 5.5 days of continuous physical torture on 0 sleep 3 separate times.
3 times.
He finished one of those Hell Weeks with double pneumonia and stress fractures in his legs.
It sounds superhuman. But Goggins didn't do it through some innate genetic toughness. He built a psychological system. And it started with a mechanism he calls the accountability mirror.
Right.
He would write his insecurities, his deep flaws, and his goals on Post-it notes and stick them to his bathroom mirror. Every single morning, he forced a radical, deeply uncomfortable self-honesty.
Because the accountability mirror strips away all the soft self-acceptance we use to coddle ourselves. If he was being lazy, the note on the mirror said, "You are being lazy."
No excuses.
Exactly. It was a daily reckoning to stop the lies he was telling himself about why he wasn't succeeding.
Right.
And through that extreme physical and mental endurance, he developed what he calls the 40% rule.
This is my absolute favorite concept. Goggins realized that when your brain is screaming at you that you are completely done, that your muscles are failing and you cannot take one more literal step.
You're actually only at 40% of your true physical capacity.
Exactly. Your brain is just throwing up a smokescreen. Think of it exactly like a governor on a car engine.
Oh, that's a great analogy.
Yeah, a mechanical governor limits an engine's top speed to prevent it from ever getting hot enough to sustain damage. Goggins argues that our brains have an evolutionary survival governor. It shuts us down with feelings of pain and exhaustion way before we are in actual danger, simply to keep us comfortable and safe.
But we have to make this practical. Because running on broken legs with pneumonia is incredibly extreme.
Right. For you, the listener, sitting in a corporate office right now or studying late at night for a degree, how do you apply this without physically or psychologically destroying yourself?
That's the key question.
If you're in a corporate job, Goggins' 40% rule isn't about running until your shins fracture. It's about that moment at 4 p.m. on a Friday when your brain says, "I'm totally fried. I cannot look at one more spreadsheet. I'm done."
If we connect this to the bigger picture, Goggins' raw intensity is actually perfectly aligned with Anders Ericsson's rigorous science of deliberate practice. Well, that 4 p.m. moment on a Friday is your brain's governor kicking in to seek homeostasis. You use that exact moment to do just one more deep work task. You stretch the capacity of your focus by 5 minutes.
Oh, I see.
Goggins calls this callousing the mind. You don't have to run an ultramarathon. You just have to do the difficult, uncomfortable thing you are currently avoiding every single day.
And the psychology behind it is fascinating. Doing a hard task artificially raises your baseline for panic. So when a real crisis hits at work or in life, your brain's alarm system doesn't trigger as quickly. You've built a callus over your fear response.
Precisely. You're manually raising the threshold of that internal governor. And when things get incredibly difficult, Goggins uses another mechanism called the cookie jar.
The cookie jar.
Yeah, he built a mental inventory of every hardship he had ever survived, every piece of childhood abuse, every failure, every hell week. When his mind begged him to quit in the present moment, he would mentally reach into that jar and use his past suffering as objective proof that he could endure the current pain. He weaponized his own trauma into fuel.
Wow. So what does this all mean? We've covered a massive amount of ground today, but if we synthesize the ultimate blueprint for human greatness from all 5 of these sources, it comes down to a clear sequence.
It really does.
First, drop the myth of innate talent. As Ericsson showed us in Peak, your brain will change shapes if you force it.
Second, treat your effort as the ultimate multiplier, because Duckworth's math and grit proves effort counts twice.
Third, commit to a long, ego-suppressing apprenticeship in service of your life's task, taking Greene's advice in mastery.
Fourth, use Holiday's Stoic framework in The Obstacle. Is the way to mentally delete what you can't control and reframe disasters into education.
And finally, when your internal governor screams that you have nothing left to give, tap into Goggins' Can't Hurt Me mindset and realize you are only at 40% of your capacity.
It is a demanding, uncompromising blueprint, but it is undeniably an empowering one because it shifts the power entirely away from genetic lottery tickets and places it squarely in your own hands.
Yes.
It exists in your daily choices, in your focus, and in your willingness to endure the friction of growth.
At the beginning of this deep dive, we talked about feeling like you were only given the blueprints for a garden shed when you desperately wanted to build a skyscraper. But the neuroscience and the history we've unpacked today prove that your blueprint is never fixed.
Not at all.
If modern science proves the brain literally rewires itself based on the specific uncomfortable demands we place upon it, and history proved that our mental governor constantly lies to us about our limits, well, what is the one demand you're currently avoiding because you've convinced yourself you just aren't naturally good at it? What if that exact barrier isn't a wall at all, but actually your starting line?